monetize this? How are we going to do that? So plan B was, well, we have the best search. Let's license our search technology to the likes of Yahoo and AOL and others who were the leading portals at that time. But nobody would pay them a decent fee. So plan B didn't work. Plan C turned out to be stealing a great idea from another search company. That company was called Overture. Overture's search engine wasn't any good, but its idea of presenting objective search results on one part of the web page and paid search queries on the other part of the page, that's really rocket science, right? Yeah? But that idea gave Google a license to print money. Better search with that idea, and off they went. Starbucks. We all know Starbucks today. It was not a coffee bar chain at the beginning. It was a small chain of retail coffee stores that roasted its own coffee. You'd go in and you'd buy some beans. They'd grind them for you fresh, and you'd take them home and brew it at home. Howard Schultz took a vacation in Italy, saw the coffee bar culture, and said, gee, I wonder if that would work in Seattle. It worked pretty well in Seattle and lots of other places. But it wasn't plan A, plan B. PayPal, we all know PayPal. There was a guy named Max Levkin who had world-class cryptography skills. And he could code stuff that nobody could crack. So the question was, what do I do with that technology I have? So plan A for Max was to say, well, you know, there's lots of wireless stuff happening, so I'm going to encode stuff that's going to travel from PDAs to other connected devices, because that data is going to have to flow securely. Couldn't sell it. And then he had another idea, plan B. That didn't work, nor did C or D or E. But plan F, the next idea for how to use this technology, he said, well, I'm going to build a web demo, and I'll put it up, and I'll get some real-world feedback about how people want to use my technology. And people started using the web demo to do eBay transactions, to transfer money safely on the web. And then the light bulb went off, and he said, aha, what we're going to use this technology for is to make it possible for people to exchange money safely in internet commerce. And that's the PayPal we know today. But A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the seventh application of his technology is what finally worked. Okay. Now, what do these have in common? They didn't stick to their original model, but today they're all household names, and they got there because they had the courage and the insight to abandon plan A and get on with plan B or C or whatever. Okay. Now, there are lots of other stories I could tell you. They're in the book. Shanda is a Chinese internet company somewhat like Zynga. It was earlier than Zynga. Chinese, if you don't know it, are internet addicts, and they love all these online games. And Shanda had a pay-to-play model. So you have to pay to play the game. You got a scratch card, you signed up, and you paid. They listed on NASDAQ, and at one point they said, you know, I think we'll change the business model. We're going to make it free to play the games, and we're going to sell tractors and other stuff, avatars and so on, to play the games. Completely changed the model, and they grew even faster. Toyota, if you think about what Toyota's done over the last couple of generations, essentially what they've done is figured out how to build very reliable cars for less cost than other car makers can do. It's about gross margin. Oberoi, anybody in the room stayed at an Oberoi hotel? They're a small chain of hotels in India, phenomenal hotels on the best hotels in the world lists every year. They always have 2 or 3 in the top 10. And they do that by doing the opposite of what Ryanair does. Instead of taking cost out of their operating model, they just shovel more money into it to make it an ever more luxurious experience at their really high-end hotels. So if you want a massage at an Oberoi hotel, it's not just a massage. It's which kind of massage would you like? A Thai massage, an India Ayurvedic massage, a Swedish one, whatever. Dow Jones, publisher of the Wall Street Journal and other business financial information, has made the switch from the print age to the digital age pretty much without missing a beat. The New York Times, on the other hand, had to be bailed out by a Mexican billionaire. And they've done that because of their working capital model. Dow Jones makes you pay in advance, whether it's a Wall Street Journal subscription or online data you want, you have to pay up front. One of the most interesting companies we studied is Zara. I think you know Zara stores. Zara is one of the very few companies where they actually messed around with more than one of the elements in the business model. And because of that, it's been really difficult for the other leading retailers in the world, Gap, where I used to work, H&M. It's been very hard for them to compete with Zara because Zara's model's better and hard to duplicate. Lots more stories I could tell you. Now, back to where we started, business plans. Why doesn't Plan A work? The reality is when we start on the path of developing a new venture, there's a lot we don't know, if we're honest. There are some things that we know we don't know, all right, that we try and get answers to. But the things that will kill you are the things you don't even know you don't know, and therefore you don't have a way to ask questions and get the answers. And the only way to get those answers is to get into the marketplace and begin to learn. Now, often I see this phrase, so who's written or helped an entrepreneur write a business plan? Some of you have done that, right? Okay. Did you write this phrase in your business plan? We believe that blah, 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 blah. You probably wrote that. May I translate what I think you meant? Yeah. I think this is what you meant. I've been so busy writing this business plan that I've had no time to get any real data, but I fervently hope and pray that blah, 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 blah. Am I close? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so there's a solution. We ought to quit working so much on planning. It's very difficult to plan these highly uncertain entrepreneurial ventures. And instead, we ought to get on with the business. We ought to find some analogs and antilogs. We can learn an awful lot from them, as Steve Jobs did. We should identify the crucial 1 or 2 or 3 leaps of faith at a particular moment in time. Identify some hypotheses, what we think the answers are to those untested leaps of faith, and go get data. You can build a dashboard to monitor your progress as you go. I'm not going to talk about that here, but there's a chapter in the book. But the real story here is we ought to do a lot less planning and a lot more real learning in the marketplace, in our judgment. Okay. Don't take it from us. This guy, Dennis Whittle, has built a fabulous company called globalgiving.com. And essentially what he says is even in this sort of social space where his company works, it's all about doing experiments and being rigorous about finding out answers to what you don't yet know. Whether you know you don't know it or you don't know it, you've got to experiment and be willing to move your model. Now, really good book on this topic, as I noted before. There's another really good book. This book also has my name on the cover, and it's about how you assess opportunities. So before you start on this Plan B process, can you take a rigorous look at your idea and say, should this work, or am I crazy? So this book helps you do that. So I think I'll stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you have. Who's got the first one? And we are required to give you the microphone, so don't say a word yet.
Of course. Well, I was just thinking, in the
you guys have to go, right? Yeah. Yes. No, you told me you had to go, so go. Yeah.
All right. In the intersection of this concept of getting to Plan B and venture capital, I would think that it would be kind of a privilege for entrepreneurs to be able to develop a business plan or develop their business model based on facts. But on the other hand, it would take a long time. And venture capitalists would really like to see some kind of fully fledged business plan to make a decision. So making it all fact-based, developing it with analogs and antilogs, and rigorously testing this will prolong the process quite significantly, I would believe, and therefore may be difficult for startup companies who are in scarce of funding to pursue.
It's a key dilemma, and you've hit it on the head. In Randy's experience and mine, though this looks like it would prolong the process, what it actually does is it shortcuts the process. Because in the typical process, if you don't do this, you have an idea, you raise a business plan, somehow you convince somebody to give you money even though everything's untested, right? And what do you then do? You think, oh, I got the money, my job is now to implement the plan. And so what do? You head down the road that's going to take you where you think you want to go. But it turns out it's the wrong road. So you spend a lot of time and a lot of money on a dead end, and then you have to say, well, I'm sorry I burned your money, but now I've learned some things and I want to go back and take a different path. It's actually faster to get really clear up front what are the 2 or 3 leaps of faith that are critical, and test just those. We're not saying test them all, but test the critical ones. And once you've done that, you can then go to the angel or the VC and say, well, look, I've got data about this. So we've eliminated these risks because we know this. There remain these next leaps of faith, and what I need your money for is to help me test those. But we're now part way along the road. So actually, perhaps paradoxically, I think this is a faster process, not a slower one. And it's also much more capital efficient. And you probably don't want to burn the VC's money if you don't have to. It isn't a good way to build good investor relationships. Wait, microphone.
Chairman of Welfare Tech Invest, one of the funds that Accelerators manage. When I worked with venture capital and startup 10 years ago, I saw a ton of businesses that were killed because of too much business planning.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't invested the first one yet, but soon to come. We have a lot of money. What we're looking for is reason to believe, or at least what I'm looking for is reason to believe. And the worst, it turns me absolutely off this, the market is so big, so if we just get 1%, then that.
If I could only sell a Coke to every kid in China,
yes.
I'd be rich, right?
Yeah. It's so easy to see. You got to show some reason to believe that this is something, you have something to offer in the market. But everybody knows that all the planning is not going to have been carried out before you're coming to the investor. So, and that's what I'm hearing also from the other investors in the market, that there is a change in the perspective of what a business plan should do, depending on how much you're investing and what level you're investing in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And more, the good investors have figured out that it doesn't make sense to invest significant amounts of money too soon because there are too many things that are unknown. And it's actually in an entrepreneur's interest to wait later to invest the money as well, because if you ask for money really early, when all the risks are unvalidated, the investor is going to ask for a very large stake in your company because it's so risky. If you can get partway down the path by finding a frugal way to test some things and de-risk it, at least in some ways, then the valuation's better. So that's better for the entrepreneur. It's also better for the investor, which is why I think we're seeing what you say. They want to see some proof points before meaningful amounts of money come in. Yeah, I think it's a big change.
Yeah. Of course, then the risk is that the entrepreneur spends all his or her time on satisfying the milestone communication towards the investor. But that's another story.
Well, nobody says there's no risk here. There's still going to be risk, right? And Durandi and I argue that this is a foolproof way to build a perfectly successful business. Of course not. Not all business is going to work. But we think we can move the needle a little bit and improve the odds. And the odds are tough odds, whether it's for the entrepreneur or the VC, right? They're very tough odds. So, yeah, I think your point's well taken. Question here.
Do you believe that you can actually learn this way of working as a startup or an entrepreneur or whatever you would call it? And what would kind of, from your perspective, be the most efficient way to learn this kind of rigor that you're introducing?
Clearly, it can be learned. We actually did an interesting thing when we were in the process of researching the book. Randy took this set of ideas into a company called Intuit. They make a financial software called Quicken. I don't know if you know the company, but they're the biggest sort of financial software company in the North American market. And they have sort of a new idea unit that's coming up with new stuff. And they took all these ideas and they said, okay, let's apply this to our portfolio of new ideas. And within a month, they had killed 4 projects because they figured out actually it's not working. They had built dashboards for all the rest of them, and they had set clear milestones. Okay, the real questions on this project are this, this, and this leap of faith. Let's go examine those, and if they pan out, we'll give them some more money. If they don't pan out, we'll kill them too. So clearly these ideas work. Can just anybody learn to do this? I'm not sure that we could pick, if there's somebody walking by on the sidewalk out there, could we pick them off their bicycle and put them in here, dip them in a vat, and they come out? Probably not, okay? But can we help entrepreneurs apply this set of tools? Yeah, I believe we can. And in fact, I have a workbook that I'm going to email to May Britt. If we have time, I'll put it up and show you. It's a systematic way to tackle it, these questions, one at a time. No question we can do this. Yeah.
So in extension of Peter's question, one side of the equation is to learn the method and how to do the stuff. And the other side of the equation is to get the content right, like to really understand, is this the critical hypothesis that I'm testing here? Do you have any suggestions on how to derive, or like Steve Jobs could call the manager of eagles? Most entrepreneurs wouldn't be able to do so. Like, how do we find out what are the exact critical hypotheses to test here?
Yeah, it's a really good question.
But before you answer, can I add a little thing to that? Sure. Because one thing is figuring out what to test and how to build your hypothesis, but it's also kind of interesting to how do you set up the concrete experiment to test the concrete hypothesis? If you are in science, then you have a kind of a whole tool set of methods on how you test hypotheses. So it's if it's social science, then you have statistics and all the other stuff.
Yep.
But it seems to me like in entrepreneurship, you don't have a kind of the toolbox for doing these experiments in order to test your hypothesis, and you don't know how to. You don't know, not necessarily know how to look at the kind of the output of the test and figure out, well, was this actually a proof or not?
Yeah. So how do you do that? Is sort of the question. Couple things. First of all, there are some kinds of businesses where you probably can't do this. So if you want to build a hydroelectric project in a valley in India to provide electricity, you can't build part of the dam and figure out if it's going to work, right? Okay. So there's some places where this doesn't work. But in most lines of work, you can find a way to say, okay, what are the crucial questions, to the point you raised, that I have to ask, that if I'm wrong about what I hope the answer is, I'm dead. You can figure out, as a smart person, what those crucial issues are, and then you can figure a way out some kind of little experiment. One of the stories we tell in the book is about a nonprofit business in Africa. Africa has huge leadership problems, as we all know today. Ethical, principled leadership is very hard to come by in Africa. So these 2 guys who were Stanford Business School students said, we want to crack that problem. How are we going to create a generation of leadership to make Africa a different place a generation from now? And they said, we want to build a school, and we want to attract the best and brightest leadership potential that are people that are young now. We're going to put them together, build a network, give them some tools, so that a generation from now, these people will grow up and become Africa's leaders. Well, how do you test that? So what are the leaps of faith that they had? Well, they sort of thought about it and said there are two. Can we attract the right kind of faculty to do the teaching of these kids? Leap of faith 1. Leap of faith number 2, can we attract top talent to a completely unknown school that has never existed before? How could we possibly do that? So those were the two leaps of faith. But we don't want to build a school, right? It costs money for land and buildings and all that stuff. So what they did was they said, well, first they looked around for analogs, okay, and they found some other schools that had done some interesting things they could copy. But what they did is they said, well, let's start with just a summer program. So there are lots of schools that are empty in the summer. Okay, so we're going to go use this school's turf in the summer. And by the way, faculty aren't busy in the summer either. So we're going to see if we can attract top faculty to this vision we have. And we're going to get a facility that we can use and not pay very much for. And then and then we'll see if we can attract top students. So note, they didn't build the actual product, but they built something that was like the actual product. And the first summer worked great. They got fantastic faculty, and they got fantastic students to enroll. So based on that, they were then able to go to philanthropic money and say, look what we accomplished in the first summer. Would you now give us money with which to build a school, or would you sponsor a kid? It's called African Leadership Academy. I believe they've now graduated 3 classes of students. It's a 1-year post-high school program. The first class of, I think, 70 students, about 2/3 of the students they were able to place in full-ride scholarships in top American and European institutions when they graduated. And those students now, because it's really still new, are what, 2nd, 3rd, 4th-year students at top schools. So I think that's an example. There's no magic cookbook that says, here's how you figure out what your crucial questions are. But if you're a smart person, you'll figure out what they are. And if you're an inventive person, then you'll say, okay, how can I get some data about those crucial questions that's maybe not perfect data, but it's a whole lot better than the data I have now? Did I answer your question?
I think,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think it's very hard to. I think there is no definitive answer, and therefore I completely buy it.
There isn't. But there is an answer. You just have to find your way to it. Steve Jobs was pretty creative. Well, let's call some rock bands. Right? These guys were pretty creative. Well, let's build a school. Let's try a short school before we try and build our real school. Yeah, you can do it. Yeah? Microphone here. Or question here? Yeah, we better not slide it, right?
And just getting back to the point, if you're really smart, you'll figure out what to test. I think you really have to be smart. I think that's what struggles me quite a lot with this idea. It's actually very, very hard. So could you just elaborate on a few methods of how to be smart to figure out what to test?
If I knew the answer...
I know.
Yeah. I as was said here, I don't think there's a simple answer.
No, of course not.
I don't think there's a simple answer. But for every business idea we have, there are 1 or 2 sort of fundamental questions. It might be, is this technology really going to work? So I was talking yesterday with some people about electric vehicles. There's one of our alumni with whom I had dinner last night has bought a Tesla car. And he was talking about electric vehicles, and he just has to recharge his car every night, and it goes 400 kilometers. There's another company called something Bright Start or Better Place, thank you, that has a very complicated technology about how you're going to swap out your batteries with robots and all. Well, there's some sort of fundamental questions that underlie those 2 approaches to the same problem, and reasonable people have invested in both of those. But I think you can ask the question, as I look down the road, what do I have to prove here to know that I have something that might over time work. I wish I could be more definitive for you. I don't think I can be. But in each setting, you can figure out, okay, so what do we really have to show in order to say, okay, the risks have gone down, now I'm worth putting some more money into this thing. And my former student who drives the Tesla thinks that the better place idea is never going to work because there's no way to make that technology efficient enough to swap out batteries. Whereas, kind of like Moore's law, you know, the time it takes to recharge a battery is coming down, and if you follow the curve, at some point, we're going to get there. I wish I had a simpler answer for you.
Well, possibly this is where
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, talk about effectuation, because that's a set of great
It's
ideas.
just a thought, but maybe this is where effectuation, like who you are, who you know, and what you know, could come to aid to some extent by involving stakeholders to try to get them answer the question for you and not necessarily answer the question yourself. Could be, I guess, one step ahead.
And does everybody in the room know these ideas of Sarah's, these effectuation ideas? I understand she's been here, so many of you know those ideas. It's fantastic work, and I think one of the real insights of Sarah's is that effectuation doesn't require you to head down this path. It says, instead, can I, given my means, find an interesting path that may take me to an interesting place, which might be a very different place than the place I started out. It's another way, right? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I was wondering, going back to the school example, and the reflections about how to set up the hypothesis, that sounds to me like it could be a way of doing a pre-marketing thing, a small-scale launch. So could that be one set of hypotheses? Do you have any other examples of that?
So doing pre-marketing or a prototype or a small-scale launch, many web entrepreneurs today with ideas for the web find it so cheap to build the application or to build at least a simple prototype of the application that they build something, they put it up on the web, and they see if they get click-throughs. And if they get them, great, sorry, the product isn't really ready yet. We'll let you know when it is. But meanwhile, what have you got? You've got some click-through data that says that given the proposal, people actually ask for more information. What have you done to risk? You've taken it down by a little bit. So yes, I think this notion of prototyping and testing prototypes of whatever sort they might be is a crucial part of this whole way of thinking. Exactly. Yeah. And it's often easier to find a way to do that, like the school guys did, than at first it might appear. You might say, well, how can I possibly test a school without building a school? Well, they did, right? Yeah. And the web can sometimes help. Yeah.
I work in business development in Novozymes, and we have, to an extreme degree, started to incorporate this way of thinking when we work with business development over the last 5 years or so, to really work on hypotheses and then move forward based on that. It's difficult. One believes that the big corporates have money, so you get allocated. But the fact is that when you work with business development in a big corporate, you constantly have to go to your investor, every other week kind of thing, to give an update and show that you are justified to have the resources. And what I find to be the biggest challenge is that that you have some hypothesis that you're trying to test out right now, but when you give the presentation, you have to appear as if everything is settled and you know everything you have, right? And then once you've moved ahead and you look back on that presentation, you think, oh, Jesus,
sorry,
did I really say that?
I lied to you.
But that's the way we try to operate, and I think this idea of, you can maybe also fail if you believe it's one hypothesis that you need to find and test out. It's a continuous way of moving forward, of creating hypothesis, having some assumptions that you then use to create a real anchor point based on which you move forward, Otherwise, you're just going to spin around. And then you go out there, get your feet wet, you learn, and then you redefine everything once again. So it's a continuous process of doing those things.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's often I wish I was an entrepreneur. I know that sounds so difficult, but it's the corporate world regarding that stuff is just extremely bureaucratic and
it's really difficult in corporations, and it's one of the reasons why most of the world's major innovations don't come from big companies, right? They come from people in garages who can do things free of all of that bureaucratic red tape.
Yeah, the real creative people break out, and the rest is just like me who stay in the corporate. Right?
Well, you'll have your day. You know, it's not too late. But but I think there's a point there. One of the reasons Randy and I wrote the book isn't just to help entrepreneurs. It's also to educate investors. Because if the investors, whether they're corporate investment committees or VCs or angels, if the investors believe it's the entrepreneur or entrepreneur's job to faithfully execute the plan, take the check and execute the plan, if that's what they believe the job is, we're going to have a problem with innovation, right? Because that's not the entrepreneur's job. The entrepreneur's job, in our view, is to have a plan, at least a tentative plan, and say, look, here's what I know about my venture because I've already got some data. Here's the next really important things that I don't know that I've got to get answers to. And Mr. Investor, I'd like your money so that together we can get those answers. And if I'm right about my hunches, my hypotheses, then here's what the future holds. If I'm wrong, because we have a rigorous method and roadmap laid out for getting those answers, we're going to get them capital efficiently. We're going to test quickly, and we're going to test cheaply, and we're going to fail fast, rather than failing big and failing slow. And we're going to get that data quickly. So I think there has to be a fundamentally different pattern of communication between investor and entrepreneur than the one you described. I think the old model of telling the investor how wonderful and rosy the picture is and then hoping they don't discover that it isn't until you've found a better path, I think that's a mistaken model. And so a key part of this effort, I think, is to help the investor or the corporation understand this is a highly uncertain process, and nobody can tell you, look, here's the future I'm going to guarantee you. Much better is to say, here's the path we're going to follow together, and if we have to change course, it's because the data tells us to change course, right? It's not because I'm a flaky entrepreneur and I change my mind. It's I got data, and the data says, oh, your hypothesis was wrong. Okay, well, now we have to pivot and do something different. So I think it's a very fundamental question you've raised, and not all of the world is yet on board with this kind of thinking, as we all know, right?
Or they whatever talk it, but they don't.
Yeah. It's very hard for corporations because they want certainty, right? Yeah. And we have a chapter in the book on dashboards, measuring all this stuff as we go. Think about the role of a dashboard in a big company. What's the role of the dashboard? Every company has one. It's to keep the ship on track, right? And the moment there's the slightest deviation, the dashboard throws up the signals, oh, got to get back on track. Well, the role of the dashboard for the entrepreneur is exactly the opposite. It's to find out when I should change course and when I want to point east instead of north. Very difficult thinking for a big company to embrace. It's just not the way they work. So it's really hard.
To make life even more complicated, I'm working for the public sector, and we have even
good
more
luck
strict.
with that.
Yeah. No, just to how do you? Is there any way that you can impose? For instance, one of the things that I'm doing, I'm responsible for quite a few policies where we actually give money to entrepreneurs. Is there any way that we can strengthen our questions? I mean, they all apply for stuff, and we have, of course, stuff they fill out. What kind of question could you recommend that we will ask them to be more sure that our money actually went to somebody who would do something nicely with them?
These are applications for what kind
of? For grants, for instance.
For grants to do what?
For money to develop new technologies. introduce them into a market.
Yeah, I'll give you an answer that maybe you don't expect. It was something we were talking about at lunch today. I think there's too much public attention to encouraging startups and too little public attention given to startups that have also already proven they've got something, and if they had a little more fuel for the fire, they could grow it. I think in most countries, the public policy guys are putting the money in the wrong place.
We had that discussion. I think just maybe to clarify, I mean, for instance, one of the foundations that we have is actually taking, if you have an idea, and it's actually really close to market, but you just need to bridge that final, get your first customers. There you can actually have a grant now to help bridge that. And there, of course, we're working with technologies that's really close to market, and it's very, very difficult to tell them apart. All of them are, of course, very cool ideas.
But so they're cool ideas, and do they have any customer traction data yet?
No, and that's why they want to sort of get this final support to get some customers.
So at that point in time, I think you're playing a bit of a random game.
Yeah.
So you're probably better off saying, okay, I've got a budget, I can fund 10 of these or 100 of these, whatever it is, and I'm only going to give you enough money to go test these couple of hypotheses, and if you come back with answers, then maybe I'll give you more. So I think one of the solutions isn't so much to screen them, but to be very careful with the first bit of cash and say there's more if the first bit of cash leads to a green light, that helps. It's really hard to predict, is this technology or that one going to work? I'm no good at that. No. And frankly, are the VCs any good at that? No, 1 in 10 works, right? So don't try and get good at that. You can't.
No, we know.
You can't. Instead, have a process that will quickly funnel the money to where it works. It's one of the reasons why Silicon Valley venture capital investors make a lot more money than the rest of the ones in the world. Because once they find they've got a winner, they pour a lot of fuel on that particular fire. And they say, okay, let's ride this one. Whereas in this part of the world, often our VCs say, well, okay, I've got a nice 5 or 10 times return. I think I'll take my money now, when they could have had a 100-time return if they put more fuel in the fire. So you might think about it that way. What else?
It's just really a follow-up comment or question on our discussions over lunch on whether to support early startup creation or support the ones that are already proven in the market. Because in the Accelerate program, what we've been doing over the last month and a half or so is to try to make sort of a look at the strategy right now and where we're supposed to be in the market in terms of getting the most out of the funds that we've been given. And one of the discussions we've had is to how early actually to address these entrepreneurs. Should we go down on faculty level and talk to the guys that might have found something really clever but haven't got the slightest clue on how to start a business and if they want to start a business at all? Or should we focus our efforts later on in the stage in terms of actually if the goal is to create viable growth ventures that will create new workplaces and at least on the national scene, should we focus our efforts later on?
I guess it's a question of what you're trying to accomplish. If the goal is to create economic development and jobs, then the money's probably better spent a bit later. If the goal is to commercialize technology for perhaps its own sake and to showcase the technology that Danish scientists can create, that's a reason to invest early. In fact, you probably need a bit of both, right? It doesn't hurt to have a little fuel in both places.
So let me ask a different question. Your methods, can they be applied in both sectors, if we will, or in both life stages in a startup?
Well, there are different tools. I think I showed a slide of this, my other book, New Business Road Test. That's a book that articulates a framework called the 7 domains that you can use to say, here's an idea. Now, does this idea have a decent chance to actually work? And how might I ask that question in a rigorous sort of way? Not does the technology work, that's a different question. But if the technology works, is there a market for this product? What are the trends in that market? How fast is that market growing? Is the customer likely to buy this particular solution? Why or why not? And do I have any evidence about that? Same set of questions on the industry side. Do I want to be in this industry? If it works, do I actually want to be in that industry? Or is that such an unforgiving industry that it would be better to recast the opportunity and compete in a different way? So this framework is a useful one to apply very early to an idea to sort of raise the questions of why won't this work? And too often the question we ask is why will it work? But the more important question in my judgment is why won't it work? Because if I can't find it, if I work really hard at finding a reason why it won't work and I can't find one, then I should be kind of encouraged. And then maybe I start down this path toward finding the right plan B to make it work in the right way. So I think very early, this framework is really helpful to take a look at the idea before you really get into the marketplace. But it will then raise the marketplace questions for which this hypothesis testing logic then gets applied to get the answers. Does that help?
To some extent, but maybe at least in the bio scene, a lot of the projects we see doesn't even have a plan A or a plan pre-A.
Yeah.
So, they're not even on the alphabet yet. So.
Yeah. So earlier,
right, but there are other,
yeah. And then later, there's a whole range of issues on how you effectively grow a business. Big companies are really good at running a ship that's pointed in the same direction as it was pointed yesterday, right? They're really good at figuring out how to do that. But the skills at doing that are very different than the skills the entrepreneur needs, where the world keeps changing around you and competitors come and go and you don't have the customer's needs quite right, so you got to pivot yet again. It's a completely different skill set. So there's a whole lot of things we can help teach entrepreneurs about how to grow a business, issues about people, issues about cash, issues about customers, that others have had to wrestle with before, and that's yet later in the process. So the good thing is entrepreneurs have been at this for a long time, right, around the world, and we can learn from them, and we can get better at it by applying what others have learned. So I think this is all eminently learnable stuff. Does that mean we can make every business work? No. Can we move the needle a little bit? Yeah, I think we can.
Can we kill the ones that
Pardon?
shouldn't work? And can we kill the ones that shouldn't work?
And quickly kill the ones that shouldn't work. We run a course at London Business School called Entrepreneurship Summer School, and we take about 50 ventures a summer, and we put them through this process. They come in with an idea, and at the end of the summer, having gathered a lot of data, they do a presentation to a group of angel investors on their idea. Why will or won't my idea work, given what they've learned? That process has resulted in 140 startups over the last several years, of which 120 are still in business. Remarkable rate. But the most interesting data point is that 2/3 of the ventures that were started were not the idea with which they began the process. So they go out and do the work rigorously, and they say, yeah, I want to be an entrepreneur, but not with that idea, right? I'm going to change. Yeah. Anything else?
Just a question on the nuts and bolts of getting to plan B. I embrace the concept of analogs and best practice, something that has been used in many other industries for periods of time. However, antilogs, when using it in practice, sometimes I find it difficult to identify antilogs that actually provide value to me, because, of course, there are millions of antilogs, and there are millions of reasons why each antilog went wrong. And I think it's very difficult to tease out what actually is valuable knowledge. Could you provide some just reflections on how to identify antilogs, which actually
useful antilogs.
useful antilogs,
Yeah.
exactly.
First, let me draw a distinction. Analogs, useful ones, are often not in your industry. So Gillette was a very useful analog for Steve Jobs, even though razors and razor blades, completely different industry, right? Antilogs, on the other hand, tend to be in your industry. So somebody's probably done something before, like what you're trying to do, that didn't work, or that worked, but you want to do something fundamentally different. So there may be a high-end player that does something that's very expensive and complex, and you have a way of saying, I'm going to come in and enlarge the market by doing something much simpler and without the bells and whistles. And so by finding somebody who's quite relevant to what you want to do that's come before you, and clarifying your differences between you and that something, I think that can give you a clarity of purpose. It can help tell the story to your investors about why you and what's the value here. But to your question of how do I pick the right one, again, I don't know that there's a cookbook to tell you how to do that, but smart people will find interesting ideas that help make that clear.
So it keeps coming down to the smart people. Could you elaborate on what are the qualities that you would be looking for in smart people?
In such a smart
when we are
person.
selecting entrepreneurs, what you would be looking for?
Well, first of all, thanks. First of all, I would say entrepreneurship, when played to win, is almost always a team sport. Contrary to the mythology that casts entrepreneurs as these, lonely solo actors, it's almost always a team sport. And good teams are incredibly diverse. Different personalities, different stages in life, different skills. So for me, if you craft a team that brings together lots of different stuff, gets back to effectuation. Saris puts together these different people with different kinds of skills. I think that's a key part of that question. I'm sensing we should finish up here, right? Yeah?
I'm sorry, because it's really a great discussion. And I think we can suggest to continue outside. We have some snack and some drinks. And so we can all just get the last minutes of your stay here, because John is leaving with the taxi in like 15 minutes.
Is it that soon? No, it can't be that soon.
To the 20 minutes.
22. We have a long time.
Okay. But thank you very much. It has been a great pleasure
Thank
so
you.
far.
Thank you.
Yeah.